one thing I wanted to do, you mentioned that you often start with some sort of performance gains to try and, just better for the teams often, or maybe not better, but what they want for the teams. And it can give you something to then base some things off. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is go through a few different problems that I've seen from esports that are like just really common, come back all the time. And we go through maybe, well, if you've got solutions for them, share them. But I'm expecting it to be more like this is a starting point. This is how I'd start out on this problem. And then we can, again, give some people some actionable advice of things to try.
Yeah. Okay. God, grilling me here. Okay, I'm ready. Right.
So the first one starts off, maybe a bit easier. Not easier because of the topic, but easier because you've written about this. And everyone should, of course, go and read that for sure. But how to beat tilt. Yes.
That's a classic. Yeah, I do get asked about this frequently, understandably, because it's one of the biggest, I think, challenges that a lot of players face. I think it's something everyone faces, and I will preface this by saying I'm not perfect as well. Sometimes I will feel tilted. It's something that happens. It's the nature of the games we play, and it's the nature of us as humans, how we respond to it. But what matters is how we work through that, and the behaviors we engage with after tilt. So I guess some of the first kind of ports of call, if I was working with someone that came to me and asked about, how do I beat tilt, is I suppose getting to the bottom of, well, what tilts you, what actually frustrates you. Because for some people it's themselves. If they miss a shot, that can be the most frustrating thing in the world, because they expect perfection from themselves. Maybe they don't acknowledge that they can make mistakes, because they want perfection. That's one way. For others, it's, I was playing really well finally, but my whole team was terrible. That's a very common one, is, well, the other team, especially in solo queue, if you're thinking about League of Legends, the impact that one player can even have on a game alone, even if you've got 4 good players, can still really change kind of the game and the way it's played. So for some people, that's kind of the core of tilt. And there are other reasons as well. So I would say the first port of call is self-awareness, and working on that with players is, sometimes challenging, because, instantly people want to hear, no, just do this. This will fix it. And there are things, that can help. But again, one of the first and most important things is that self-awareness of, well, what really tilts you, what frustrates you, and why does that frustrate you? Why does it frustrate you that you miss shots? Is it because, you have some signs of perfectionism? Okay, if we know that, then we can start work on the perfectionism side of things and go into that. If it's about kind of team and your attitude towards your teammates, then we can focus on maybe a technique around controlling the controllables, right? You can't control your teammates if you're in solo queue, but you can control what you do with that, and kind of the mindset around sometimes seeing these things, which could be frustrating, as a bit of a challenge. If you're basically playing 4v5 because someone on your team is griefing and so on, that's an opportunity to learn how to play whilst disadvantaged, right? It's an opportunity where in a game someone might be quite ill. You might have a sub standing in that's not of the same standard as your usual teammate, but oh look, you've actually trained with that. Rather than being tilted, sometimes you've seen it as an opportunity to train with someone playing worse. So things around kind of working on the mindset, I would often recommend but first you've got to know the mindset, and that's where those initial questions come in. In terms of more practical things, of course, breathing exercises are a huge one. I think they're very, very common out there. A lot of people engage in breathing exercises, but I would say the one thing I would make sure with working with individuals is that it works for that person. Breathing exercises don't work for everyone. It's not a one size fits all kind of method, but it can help, in those moments where people are kind of getting a bit tilted, a bit frustrated about things. Sometimes just taking a moment, take that deep breath. And, one of the things I always encourage is to notice where you're breathing from. A lot of us breathe with our chest. Our chest goes up and down. But what we really want to do is belly breathing, which is where you breathe with your diaphragm. You pull the air in, almost like, have you seen in those old school fireplaces, you have those bellows where you can push them and pull them out? It's like that, or like an accordion, I like to say. Imagine you've got an accordion where your rib cage stops at the bottom and you're sucking the air in, and you want your belly to be pushing out as you're bringing that air in, and then you want to push the air out using your ab muscles rather than your chest, which we naturally do, especially when we're sat down. We tend to squish our diaphragm a little bit as well. So some of those deep breathing exercises, belly breathing, in those moments when you can. So in League of Legends, I often recommend taking a moment once you've died. It can be the most frustrating time, but you've got some time there. You can either spend that time being frustrated and angry, or you can spend that time trying to bring yourself back to, where you perform well, which is when you're calmer. Those are just some kind of brief early tips. Obviously, a lot of where tilt comes from tends to stem from deeper, more mindset orientated areas. So the way we think about the world, the voice we're using in our head, the way we explain situations to ourselves. So in the long term, we'd look at probably working with players to help manage their outlook on these events and change the outlook of these events and so on. Because one of the biggest kind of things, or I guess foundations of my philosophy, kind of stems around the idea that it's not the events themselves that disturb us, it's our perception of these events. It's what we tell ourselves about these events. So just like I said earlier, that kind of mindset, if we've got a challenge mindset of, well, actually, it's not actually that bad because it's an opportunity for me to grow. If you've got that mindset, you're probably going to be less tilted than someone who thinks, oh, I can't believe this only had time for one game tonight and they've ruined it. They've ruined everything. Probably going to be more tilted than that. So I appreciate it's probably not the most usable tips and techniques that I've given there, but it gives you a window into what we do as sports psychologists to understand the groundwork and kind of progress through that. But yeah, I'd say good ports of call are understanding what frustrates you, why it does, managing your mindset, and maybe some of the simple things that you can do with that is writing down key phrases on a post-it note. It's what I like to do, and I'll stick it to the bottom right hand corner of my monitor. It's great for League of Legends because every time you look at your map, you're going to see your post-it note right down there, or wherever you have your map on your screen. I suppose you can change it, but yeah, just some practical tips there to add on at the end.
I think it's really good. I think one of the things you said there on perception, I think that's just so important even for life. Like it's not just the voice that's in your head, but that there's that phrase, I can't remember who said it, but it's like something like this: the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And it could be that compared to someone else that's like really trivial, but that doesn't mean it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Exactly.
So it's been very interesting doing a lot of traveling in the last few years and going to places that I wouldn't normally go to, and seeing the kind of problems that people have to deal with. In a way, it does make you think that the stuff that we deal with in the UK or in France is just so trivial, and it's like, why is this a big problem? But then on the other hand, it's like, it's still, it's the biggest problem that we've got for us. And yes, we're in a super privileged position to be in that state, but your perception is your reality, and it doesn't matter if you're finally a professional player in the game that you've loved for ages on your favorite team, and you've got loads of fans or whatever. I mean, you can look at things that are happening with KC. They're trying to be here for so long, they're trying to be at the top level, they've absolutely more than earned the spot there, and suddenly it's all not working. And in a sense, you can say, well, you're playing for maybe a boyhood club and it should be the best situation ever, but you have no idea what's going on inside people's heads, because actually we live in our heads. We don't live outside in the world. So I think it's a really important thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you say there around kind of how what's hardest for you is hardest for you, no matter your yardstick. I used to have a kind of metaphor I'd use in sessions sometimes when they would often say, I'm feeling really stressed about this. And then they would say, oh, but it's really silly because I know people have it harder. And the fact people have it harder is good to acknowledge, good to understand for sure, to understand where your privilege lies, absolutely. But it doesn't make that any less hard for you. I liken it to having you've got a yardstick here. This is your yardstick. Someone else's yardstick might be that big, but the end of your yardstick is still the end of your yardstick, even if it's shorter than someone else's, even though a yard is a yard. You know what I mean? We can have a yard 0.5, whatever. But that kind of metaphor, I think, helps explain kind of this mindset around, often we will, self-down or shame ourselves for feeling a certain way because someone else has it worse, which absolutely they do, and we're very lucky, and we should acknowledge how lucky we are. But that doesn't necessarily change the fact that what we feel is what we feel, and that's where our perception, if we can work on changing our perception and that inner voice, that might start to change it, and one of the things I think I've had a few breakthrough sessions with clients is where talking with them, you've explored their self-talk, what they tell themselves, how they speak to themselves in their head. And it's the moment of realization when, they realize, oh, actually, I don't have to listen to what that voice says. I don't have to listen to that voice saying, oh, I should be really nervous, or I'm actually a really bad player. Well, why do I listen to that? Why do I believe that when that might not actually be true? And that is a moment usually of the start of a really big change or journey for those individuals where they can start to kind of actually change that voice or learn to not listen to it and listen to a more positive voice instead. And I love those moments. But yeah, fully agree with your idea, apart from my terrible metaphor, which, to me makes sense. But as I said it, I was like, yeah, that technically a yard is a yard. But yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't actually that had me laughing a bit, is that I will have to explain a yard is a unit of length. It's a measurement.
Oh yes.
This generation and also not English people will not understand that at all.
Well, let's say meter. Let's
meter.
do that
There you go.
Yeah, that's probably more appropriate.
Yeah, just all about our old systems.
Yeah.
Okay, one. Bringing it back to slightly more practical for a second. You mentioned breathing exercises before. You mentioned focusing on where your breathing is coming from. But then you sort of, I think, brushed over some things, which I think are very important. So you say from there, like deep breathing exercises. So what exactly do you mean by that? Is it an in and out timing? If so, what are the different options? Like, what do you mean other than, so I'm paying attention, I'm breathing from my belly and I'm pushing the air out with my abs, but then also what are some other things to consider?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And there are so many breathing exercises out there, so many different ones that have been well researched for different reasons. But the best for me and my memory, because it's just so simple to remember, is the 4x4 method. That's what I kind of go back to it's more of a means to an end to get people to notice themselves, how they feel, the tension in their body again, and come back to it. So the 4x4 method would be you would breathe for 4 seconds in, you'd hold it for 4, out for 4, and pause for 4. Now, it's not a very natural breathing method. We don't often breathe in 4 seconds like this and that. But the idea is it's getting you to pay attention to this control of that breath. And if you're doing it with your diaphragm rather than your chest, you should start to feel a little bit in that moment calmer, usually a bit more aware of your surroundings, how you feel. Often after doing 4 sets of that, which is what I generally encourage, 4x4, people would start to realize, actually, I'm quite tense, and that's one of another practical thing I often say to people who work in esports or our performers is notice how tense your body is, how much tension you're carrying. And if you're in a best of 3, you don't often realize how tense you are until the end of the match and you're exhausted, and then you've got to get up and do it again. For the next match, especially in League when matches can be like 40 odd minutes plus, and so on, and same in CSGO. But if you're in between those matches, taking a moment, having a breather, maybe even when you've died at the fountain, you can kind of ease that tension out of you again. And one thing I always remind people is tension up to a level is fine. You need to be tense, you need to be ready to perform. But if you think about how much fine motor skill you need, so how much skill you need around small movements of the mouse, small movements of clicking, knowing what to click on your buttons, etc. The more tense you are, the less and less control you have over these fine grade movements. If you tense your arm really strong now and try and open your hands and close them, it's probably quite juddery because you're really tense. Your muscles are so tense. But if you're nice and loose, you can open and close them quite smoothly and calmly. And this is the kind of analogy I like to remind players of, and I often encourage them in between matches to get up, stretch it out, roll the shoulders back, do some deep breathing, because you're letting that tension go again and you're gaining some of that fine motor control back. Because in those clutch moments where it's 1v1 and you're going for the nexus, whatever it is, you can get really tense, and that might be the difference between hitting your shot or not, hitting that cue or not.
I think it's really, really useful and definitely something that people should experiment with. I mean, you did mention at the beginning, it's we were talking about how to beat tilt originally.
Yes.
You mentioned that it's different per person and finding what works for you and that sort of thing. But an example that always stuck with me and I really wanted to do in League of Legends, but I haven't managed, at least at this stage, was someone was telling me they worked with the England cricket team and they set up a thing for the bowlers where they had a heart rate monitor and a watch to just tell them their heart rate. And they would do a bowl. I don't know the terminology. I've never been interested in cricket, so sorry if that's not how you're supposed to say it. But they would do a bowl, and if it went badly or even if it went well, as they're walking back to go again, they'd look at the watch, and they would just have very, very specific tools and protocols that wasn't about if you feel stressed or if you feel tilted. It was like, right, if the numbers are above this, you do this. If the numbers are below this, you do this. And it just supposedly took so much of the guesswork is the wrong way to say it, but it was like, okay, it doesn't matter if you feel tilted, or if you feel upset, or if you think, because then we start to get into this thing of like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this, I should just get myself out of it. And sometimes, that's great, but you can't do it, and then it can make it worse. So it was just, right, if it's over this number, you do this type of breathing exercise. And League of Legends does have so many moments where we get pauses, whether you're dying or resetting and you're about to just open on the map before you decide when you're opening. Like, if we could have a little thing to just check how am I, touch base with how I'm doing. So if you don't have a specific system for that, of course you have to just do it internally, but I think that can be incredibly useful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the key is routine as well, right? I know performance coaches that work with big teams, mental coaches as well, that kind of swear by the idea that whether they have a good game or not, they will still do their breathing exercises beforehand, because you're getting yourself in that mindset that it's just something you do. It helps you regardless of whether you win or not. It's not based on externals, it's based on internals and your own patterns. So yeah, 100% agree.